CIO has certainly changed over the last few years with all the disruptive trends that we are seeing in the IT industry today, whether it's DevOps, development and operations put together, mobility, cloud services, SaaS, PaaS, and so on, or big data. Earlier, the only option that any individual in an organization had when he looked at purchasing any IT infrastructure or IT device, he had to go through the CIO in the organization. The CIO was the main driver for purchases of IT equipment in any organization. Today, with the availability of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, that primary role that the CIO is doing has shifted to business owners. It's not very uncommon for us to be seeing situations within our customers where the CIO has, after months of evaluation, discussion with vendors, internal discussions, arrived at the purchase of perpetual licenses for, say, a CRM solution, and then one business in the same organization goes out and purchases that CRM solution as a service, the SFDC for example. So to that extent, the role of the CIO and the importance of the CIO in making the decision on IT infrastructure and IT services has declined. We in CA see this as an opportunity for CIOs. What is expected of the CIOs is to be drivers of innovation. With these changes that are happening and the disruptive trends that we are seeing in the industry, there is certainly a potential for CIOs to drive innovation in their respective companies. Big data has three aspects, three V's when we talk about big data. There is volume, there is variety, and then there is velocity. There is a fourth V which is very important, which is the value which you can get out of this big data. Big data in itself means nothing. Big data with analytics or analysis is where the huge potential is and where the demand is. And this is what will drive innovation, will drive segmentation of customers within markets, will drive service levels, will help organizations predict certain trends in the market, will help them to get a better understanding of how their operations are run. More data means more transparency into operations, a better understanding of how things run. So overall, the concept of big data is known. In CA, what we've done is, with all the software that we have in our customer locations, managing this complex IT infrastructure, we have a huge amount of data that is thrown up at these applications. We're using this data to make predictive analysis, to build intelligence into the software and the predictions that our software makes on an ongoing basis. So it results in our software predicting outages, preempting outages at customer locations. So overall, we've been exploiting this concept of big data. The fact that an organization is small does not rule out the possibility of it actually generating huge amounts of data. That's driven by the fact that there is mobility, there is an explosion of devices that the organization could be using, or its customers could be using. It could be a small organization doing small business, but it could have millions of customers across the world who are using mobile devices or their own devices to carry out transactions, which might throw up huge amounts of data, which needs to be analyzed. To get value, the fourth V out of data, which is the value out of this data, requires analysis. Now, the benefit of big data is that it helps organizations understand their operations better, to get a much greater level of transparency within their operations. It helps them to customize their solutions, helps them to innovate new products and services. It helps them to segment the market. We have this concept of markets of one. There was this company which had potentially millions of customers, was actually treating one customer as an individual. When you walked into that store and you could actually order a trouser which fitted you. So it was like treating it as using the concept of big data to actually customize your product to an individual. So big data has led to micro segmentation or greater segmentation of markets for companies. Now this company can be small, it can be large. So the size of the organization to that extent is not necessarily a defining factor on whether the organization can use big data or not and get the benefits of big data. BYOD as a concept is something that's catching on and which is outside of the control of CIOs or anyone for that matter. That's reality, and we have to live with that reality and figure out how to manage the environment and the infrastructure that is in our environment with this concept catching on. Yes, you rightly said that BYOD is resulting in a multiplicity of devices, a multiplicity of operating environments within the organization, and this has thrown up huge challenges for CIOs. Earlier it was one standard operating system, a standard platform which they defined and which they controlled. They controlled not only the intake or the purchase of that particular operating platform, but they also decided at what point in time they would upgrade or move to a new platform. Today, that control that a CIO has is limited or almost non-existent because customers or the individuals in organizations are behaving like consumers. What devices that they use at home is what they're expecting to bring within the organization and use that same device within the organization for the applications that they run in their offices. They also want the same user experience when it comes to the usage of devices. Now it's gone beyond devices. Now we're getting this concept of bring your own applications. It's not just devices that people are bringing in. They're also starting to talk about, I have this application, it helps me do this task, I want to bring this application in. So BYOA, bring your own application, seems to be a logical extension of BYOD. Now what this means for CIOs within organizations is that they have a huge challenge in terms of multiplicity of devices, complexity of the entire IT infrastructure, complexity of the entire IT environment, and the need to deliver services in spite of this complexity. Added to this complexity is the rising expectations of individuals in organizations or employees in an organization. The kind of service that they get as consumers, both in terms of the user experience and the overall service levels, is what they are expecting within the organization. So yes, CIOs are under tremendous pressure to be able to respond effectively to this trend of BYOD. At this point in time, I think, like in other technologies, consumer technology which is driving enterprise technology. Years back, it used to be the reverse. Technologies were adopted first in the office or in the organization, and then they moved to the consumer space. Today, it's the reverse, and we call that as the consumerization of IT. So to that extent, when it comes to this whole concept of Internet of Things, I see that happening first more in the consumer space. Refrigerators being connected to the internet, refrigerators having sensors to sense when, say, the milk in the refrigerator is getting exhausted or has reached below a certain threshold, or when vegetables in the refrigerator are reached below a certain threshold and when they need to be reordered. Similarly for cars, we're talking about driverless cars. We're about having sensors and analyzing data to be able to run on their own without any drivers. We talked about pacemakers being connected to through the net or through some connection to the hospital and alerting the doctor in anticipation of, say, the user of that, the patient, having a heart attack. So overall, I see this whole concept of the Internet of Things first catching on in the consumer space and only then moving on to the enterprise space. Now, in the enterprise today, in terms of what is it that can get connected? It's mobile devices that can get connected, it is the servers that can get connected, it is the applications that can get connected. Those, as we see it, are already happening. So to that extent, it's really now when the sensors come into things which are outside of the traditional IT infrastructure which have already got connected, it's when they come into that we can look at Internet of Things within the office. As I see it, the Internet of Things really is going to be more a consumer phenomenon to start with, and then only go on to the IT space. We are only seeing the beginning of that trend. Some city in Spain which was connected, which had for every square kilometer, they had a few hundred devices or sensors connected. So you could, in that city, it's possible to actually monitor the flow of water, to monitor the type of water that's getting delivered, the quality of water that's getting delivered. In parking spaces, we have sensors across that entire parking area. So when a customer gets into that parking area, he actually can drive his way through to the slot that is vacant and not having to go around to find one. Similarly, for garbage management, we have sensors which actually manage or sense what is the amount of garbage and then send out a signal to the central agency or the central station which goes and picks up the garbage. So overall, this concept of Internet of Things is just catching on. I just talked about one city in some part of Spain. It won't be long before some city in India, one of the cities in India has this on a small scale. But this is, as I see, happening only a few years ago. The trend we are seeing in organizations is to have a separate CISO or a CISO within the organization who is responsible for formulating the policies for security and ensuring that these policies are implemented. Typically, it makes sense for having a CISO different from the CIO, because you can't have the person who is actually building something also securing it. It is possible that what you've built has loopholes. So it's somebody who is not built it, who has to have a look at what is being built and see what the gaps are, what the vulnerabilities are, and then have a policy and implement the solutions which actually fix these gaps and vulnerabilities. So we're seeing in organizations a CISO function being distinct from the CIO function. That's happening in large organizations, and it will be long before in just about every organization you will see the CISO function operating separately from the CIO function. We have a fairly large setup of research and developments now in Hyderabad. We have a relatively smaller setup in Bangalore. These are people who are involved in developing products. Roughly about 30% of the products that we develop and the innovation that comes out in the products that we develop are out of India. So India is a huge contributor to the innovation that's happening on a very regular basis in CA. And we're continuing to make investments in India. India continues to remain an important destination for CA in terms of people who develop products, who support the back end, who support the customers, and so on. So we're seeing a huge amount of brain power in this country being used for development and for innovations going forward.